maybe to, kind of kick things off, you can, give folks a little bit of background on you and the fantastic work that you do.
Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you. Well, first of
Constantly
all,
amazed at how, yeah, you kind of, always got different things moving. So
yeah, no, first of all, it's such an honor to join you on here because even before we did our PBS episode together, I admired your work so much, especially as an educator, understanding how important visual images are for like really explaining stuff to people, whether it's kids or adults. Yeah, so basically, I just finished my 23rd year of teaching at the same public high school here in New York City. I teach US history and AP US history. And I guess I became a bit of a education pro-democracy advocate. Uh, I always was one in the classroom, of course, but I took my message um, from, it's still in the classroom, but I've taken off online and offline beyond the classroom since like 2016, when I just started seeing the effects of the first Trump administration and now today.
yeah, no, you really seem
Yeah.
like a journey, and I mean, yeah, even just teaching U.S. history at this time and in public schools is yeah, so tricky. But yeah, so maybe we can start talking a little bit about, that then, kind of what you
Yeah.
are, seeing in schools, how, kind of kids have sort of been reacting to some of these changes, how parents have kind of been, approaching some of these challenges because, I think at American Equality, right, we spend so much time, with data and data visualizations, and we partner with organizations, but I think it's, really helpful to hear from folks who are, kind of,
Like,
in the classrooms talking with students and things like that.
yeah, like on the ground. So, yeah, I mean, I'm in an interesting situation because I do teach in New York City. I teach at a public high school in New York City, and it's a more progressive one.
Yeah.
So, there's that. But I will say that the kids, it's an interesting mix because I realized when Trump got elected that this is pretty much all the kids have known. When I had them watch the vice presidential debate, they thought that was weird. They're like, they were so respectful. So I always have to keep reminding myself that they don't remember anything. Like most of their political presidential landscape has been Trump in power in some way, a
Right.
figure. So, but I will say that, when he was first elected, there was a big freak out from those kids. The second time around, they're kind of just not as outraged because they're just used to it. But I will say that I teach a number of trans kids who are terrified. I know that, I can imagine, I don't know if that's the case, but I can imagine that since I teach in a New York City public school, some kids are probably, I'm going to guess, speculate, concerned about the immigration policies and all that stuff. That's something they wouldn't offer up in class for their own protection. Um, and I will say that it's a running joke when I teach anything that's like somewhat negative, quote unquote, about American history, that I'll say something like jokingly, but kind of like gallows humor, like, ha ha,
Yeah.
teaching about the, race based chattel slavery today. Probably couldn't teach it this way in Florida. And the kids laugh, but like, we're laughing and I like,
A reality.
this is
Yeah.
actually not funny. Yeah. So like, I always think about the fact that, you know, these kids are getting an education that like a lot of kids across the country are not getting right now, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, yeah, not only, state by state and, obviously so much that we look at is right, like how it changes, from different areas. And even, you can jump from, one school district in New York to the next. And New York City in
Yeah.
particular has the most segregated school district in the entire nation.
Right, and
Shocking to believe in, like, the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the world, that that's like, part of our reality. And so, yeah, the
yeah.
different public schools you teach in are so different.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
but yeah, also, that these are the norms that, kids have started to come to accept. Like you look back on those, Romney Obama debates and the way, that they would, compliment each other as public servants and as, and saying like, hey, we might not agree on the best way to do this, but we agree, in kind of this American dream. We're in a totally different reality now, and kids growing up with that, they kind of, think that more seems to be the norm, even though
Yeah,
our history
yeah,
like that.
it's true, and that is so important to mention and remind folks, and I know you exhibit that really well in the work you do, that, yeah, New York City is the most segregated school system in America. So, like, as progressive as some of our classrooms are, the system itself is not very progressive, right?
Yeah, so I know you've been doing some like, writing and, kind of like, talking a bit, about like, the big beautiful bill and what, has kind of been going on there and sort of this, what seems like possibly this, inflection point in America, right? We've talked a bit about
Yeah,
education, but 17, million people who are, about to lose health insurance, another like 3 million people who are about to, lose access to SNAP and food stamps and
right.
possibly more who are losing, some impacts to that. Yeah, can you talk a bit about like how you've been thinking about this? How you're, also trying to understand it in, the context of like, growth and development and what it means for kids and schools and parents and things like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, it's going to hit the very people who voted for Trump, right? Right. It's like it's not just going to affect the liberal districts, the liberal kids. It's going to affect rural hospitals, rural schools. It's also going to affect the funding of my school, Title One school in New York City. And I think that the way I calm myself down and my students down, as hysterical as I feel about all of this at times, is looking at, the cycles of history. And if you look at the cycles of history, the fun thing is that like there's always like a backlash to the backlash. So we had the Great Society in the 60s and all those programs that they're trying to do away with and strip funds from. And then you had the Reagan backlash. Like, so there's always been this like back and forth. So I do try to remind students of that and myself of that when I'm teaching these time periods. So I I am that's not to sugarcoat the fact that the irrevocable harm that's going to come from this bill, right? Like, yeah, sure, we can look at things from an ivory tower like historians do sometimes, like, oh, well, eventually we're going to go back to a more progressive,
Right.
robust, progressive legislation. But that doesn't make, first of all, people who are accepting Social Security, who are on Medicare, who are on Medicaid, who are getting all these services now. That doesn't help them to know that, like, oh, don't worry, in like a couple decades, we'll be back in the flow
Right.
of everything else. And it's going to be devastating. And like, I think the hardest thing for me was last week, I was in a lot of different groups that were like, trying to figure out how to push back against this. And the reality was like, you can shame corporate donors, but they're going to benefit from this. You can keep calling Republicans who are probably inevitably going to vote for it. Um, but that's just this is what's happening. And so I feel like right now, history teachers across the country, it's tough when you aren't, in a mag cult and you're looking at things for what they are. It is, I will say that it's challenging for me to teach about history, to teach about the progress that we've made and then see it getting rolled back like this. I don't know, like, what are your thoughts on all of it? Like, in terms of the work you're doing, do you have times where you're like, "Wow, all of this is really grim. What am I" right?
Yes, I very much so feel that way, and I think I take that same, kind of like perspective in both ways, right? Which is that like, the US, does move through these, cycles and, in particular, like, Steven Skronik has this very,
Yeah,
established like 40 years cycle from, 1900 like US imperialism and land grabs to 1940 to the New Deal to
right.
98 with the Reagan, and now we're in 2020 and where people kind of talk about it like this age of inequality, and so what is
Yeah,
the next age that kind of comes from that. And I think to your point, like there might be this backlash, but between 2020 and the next 40 years of 2060, like what are we going to do? Like people will be hungry and not educated and, struggling to get the health insurance that they need. And so, I think a lot of it is moving, from this like, theoretical or, data oriented way to like, what can we actually do? What is the good work that's going on today? But I also find myself, I don't know, sometimes like a bit, I don't know, disappointed or jaded in some ways because I also
Yeah.
find like the I don't know the activism sometimes declining in certain areas, or that the ability that we think we have to like bring about change is declining. Whether that's on the individual level or the party level, right? Like we can, have Hakeem Jeffries like make a really long speech or
Yeah.
Twitter make a really long speech, but our, capacity for tools, sometimes feels, limited at the federal level. And that's part of the
Right.
reason I don't know, spending much more time trying to think about state level changes, county level changes, work at the, city, because inequality, it occurs in communities, right? It takes place in schools and neighborhoods and kind of across districts. And so rather than just thinking about this like big theoretical narrative about inequality in the US, what
Mhm.
can we do for specific communities and people and families? And so what are the organizations or programs that are kind of like targeting those?
That's yeah, that's such a good point because if you look at I mean, a lot of people are comparing this to the Gilded Age, and so much of the change that ended up becoming the at the federal level, the progressive era, a lot of it was happening at the local level, the municipal level, during the Gilded Age. I think that's how the Gilded Age is often taught wrong because a lot of the laws that were passed that were utilized as tools to go against corporate abuse were actually passed in the Gilded Age, like the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Interstate Commerce Act. So that I was trying to think of the other one. The Pendleton Civil Service Act,
Mm.
right? So like this stuff does get that's on the federal level, but like there were things that were passed in that time period. So I think it is a good idea to look locally. I will say that one my students have been pretty much like, I don't I guess apathetic is a good general way of describing it, but I wrote about this on Substack. I did s Speaking of local level, I've never seen more kids aware of a mayoral race than in my years of teaching than this one, and I think it was the appeal of Zohran Mamdani's campaign and, like, what he's voicing about what they're seeing in their communities. I will say gentrification is something that a lot of kids presented about at the end of the year as something that they're very concerned about in their communities, and that's something that is more tangible to work on than, you know, making sure the big awful bill gets passed or not.
Yes. Yeah, and you even see that right in some of these, like, these kind of the distribution of voting ages, right? That, in New York City, like it used to be so much more, older folks who were voting, as we see in so many elections of New York City that had very much so, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, um, so I know you were just talking about, kind of the one of the last articles that you had written on Substack. I know, you had, and we had talked a little bit about the one that, we had just published for this, new series that
Oh,
we're
oh, yeah.
called the dividing line. And so the kind of, first article that we had written in that series was about school shootings and sort of how this is like this uniquely American, phenomenon and tragedy, and that the US has more, school shootings than all other, developed countries combined. And so yeah, I would love if you could talk a bit about, some of the work that you do for, teachers, Unify to, end gun violence and that fantastic work and, some of the, changes or challenges that you're seeing there.
Yeah, I mean, if hopefully everyone watching who watches later checks out your first installment. It's the first article in your series,
Yeah, exactly.
The Dividing Line. It's incredible. I sent it to a bunch of people I know in the gun violence space. Yeah, so basically, Teachers Unified and Gun Violence, we founded it. It'll almost be 4 years ago soon, but
Wow.
I co-founded it with. So I'm not a teacher survivor. I'm luckily, we can talk a little bit about how even the drills are traumatizing around gun violence. But I co-founded Teachers Unified and Gun Violence with two teacher survivors. Abby Clements is now is the executive director of Teachers Unified. She's a teacher survivor of Sandy Hook, and then Sarah Lerner is the other co-founder, and she is a Parkland survivor, a teacher survivor, and we founded it. Teachers are always in group chats. I was in a group chat with them because we'd done another panel about school shootings, I guess. So I don't even remember what it was. I forget which school shooting the panel was even on at this point. If you look at your data, you can
Well, yeah.
that corroborates that. But it was after the Michigan one, the Oxford shooting. And Abby was like, "Why is there no teacher organization about this?" So within a couple hours, because this is what teachers do, we don't have a lot of free time. So we put it together, we came up with a name, and it took off. And we have basically the goal is to amplify educator voices around this topic because they're the ones dealing with the drills. They're the ones dealing with the ridiculous law. I think ridiculous laws about like teachers arming teachers to prevent school shootings, all that kind of stuff. People tend to not ask teachers. They come up with all these ideas, whether it's like, oh, how do we make kids feel more safe in the classroom? Like, oh, let's ban books. Like, maybe talk to some teachers about that and see how they feel. And then, of course, all the different policies around school shootings. One of the big one that we hear a lot about is just like trying to create trauma-free drills, because a lot of them, hopefully not every kid will experience in real life being in a building when there's a active shooter, but the active shooter drills are so traumatizing that
Yeah. You can
I'm sure
talk a
you,
bit about some of those. Yeah, like
y-
what that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I've had a number of them. We actually had some lockdowns at my school. One was based on a hoax. The other one was that there was something happening in the school building that we share a basement with. And terrifying. Even though you know in your heart that your classroom is safe, you just get the vision of every other videos you've seen online of teachers and students in similar situations, and you can't help but to just have carry that trauma into that experience. So, like, I one time we, like, barricaded the door. I got in trouble for that later, but, like, the kids felt like th the kids were feeling antsy, they were really scared, and it gave them something to do.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's terrifying, and it's another thing where, like, I think kids are really numb to it. We're just used to it. We're like, drill, okay," like a fire drill, but when there was actually this feeling like something could happen, I remember just having a moment of, like, terror, absolute terror, because you're just sitting ducks, like, those it's like duck and cover in the '50s, like, you're not gonna protect your if someone has even if I was an armed teacher, which I don't agree with, they're not arming me with, like, some kind of assault weapon, right? So
Yeah, and I think that's right. What's so challenging is like this really doesn't have to be our reality. Like these are our choices that we are making. That like the way we want to defend against this catastrophe is by making students really good at these drills. But there's so many other solutions for this, and
yeah,
yeah, I think what was also, I mean, I know you have a deep appreciation for this, too, with, just a giant, Twitter and TikTok and Substack, following that after we published this article, we had a lot of folks weighing in the comments being like, the only way to stop this is arming teachers,
right,
good guys who can stop the bad guys. And, I think what we really try and rely on that is like the data very clearly shows that that is not the case. The U.S. unfortunately has had so many school shootings that we have like a lot of evidence on cases where there is, armed security guard, where police do respond quickly, and the evidence consistently shows that
yeah,
the way to save lives is not by providing more guns; it is by providing fewer guns.
fewer
And
guns.
children are the collateral in the meantime, and that's really the
Yeah. Yeah, that what was there anything shocking to you in that research that you recently posted, or did it all kind of, confirm what you already, thought you knew about the situation? Anything shocking or surprising?
I think what was shocking was like how small changes could lead to massive differences basically in life expectancies and decreasing school shootings. So kind of the two
Interesting.
biggest ones there were like, common sense background checks, making
Mhm.
sure that, those, kids or parents, where the guns might be available, like, didn't have easy access to guns. And then the second one was basically like keeping guns and ammunition in separate spaces, and in particular,
Mhm.
in two different locked safes. And that those can be like basically tremendous, difference makers for that. And that there are some states that basically like when you buy, a gun, or in some places, like they will give you a free safe, like at hospitals as well. You can pick up these, free safes, and that those can really like go a very, very long way to, diminishing the risk of school shootings, as well as other types of catastrophes, youth suicide and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think just like
Wow.
knowing that there is some of this like low hanging fruit in some ways, depending on
Yeah.
how you think about this, that can really go far. And
Yeah. You know, and actually, that you just reminded me, one of the efforts that I'm most proud of that we did with the Biden administration was the Department of Ed had a letter that they wanted to send out, that they wanted principal superintendents to send out to all administrators in all school buildings about safe storage. And it was a letter to then give out to families
yeah,
with really basic, helpful instructions about how to safely store your gun if you had one. And we worked with Senator Murphy and no, not Senator Murphy. We worked with Representative Goldman. I'm like totally confusing things. Representative Goldman here in New York, and we got basically it's mayoral control of the school. So we got Mayor Adams and the Chancellor Banks to agree to send that school to every parent. And you know, some people said, "Oh, yeah, well, big deal, like, you didn't." Well, it's something, and I like to know that your data corroborates that that actually does it makes a difference. If it
it
saves
really does.
even one life, I think, why not send that letter out? It's a simple ask. So, unfortunately, a lot of those things are not happening now, and that just shows you how elections have consequences.
Yeah, so this kind of brings up, the other thing, which is that, I seen you've been down in DC, quite a bit, in the last year or so. I think, some of it probably I think was through some of this work. But yeah,
Yeah.
can you talk a bit about like how, you've been the changes that you're trying to make, the people you're meeting with, sort of how sentiment has been, like if the folks you're
Yeah.
meeting with are no longer there because they've been chainsaw doged out of the picture or something like.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so basically most of my online stuff was around education, teachers, gun violence, and then I applied to be one of the content creators of the DNC last
All
summer.
right.
Different like, I almost blocked it out because it was such a different, hopeful time. So I was there covering the DNC as a creator, and then I think that the Democrats and different Democratic senators and representatives started realizing the value in also talking to people on social media, not just cable news, because people's viewing habits have changed, right? Like whether we like it or not, people are scrolling for their news and they're sometimes getting 30-second clips. So I was invited to I would say, yeah, I was going to DC because I was getting invited to the White House to cover some events. That's not I don't think I'm invited to the White House currently. But I did get invited to go, to the Senate the night of the joint address. That was back in March, and it was really interesting because I was selected out of only it was only about 10 or 15 of us, and it was through Cory Booker's office, and then we met with, various senators. I actually met with Senator Padilla, Senator Lujan, a bunch of senators. The list goes on, and I also got to meet with their guests. So all the senators brought people who had been recently fired due to DOGE cuts. And I found that my interviews with those people did really well online because I think that the human cost of all this, like so much of what your work portrays, the human costs of these decisions that people make on the government level, whether it's federal, state, municipal, and the real world effect really was powerful for people. It was people who worked at the parks. I spoke to one woman who headed Project Head Start in I forget what state right now, but like it was so many people. I spoke to Senator Heinrich, who was like, "I'm not going in. I'm not going." So I got to get a really interesting array of interviews around that what became a pretty I think, a pretty insane speech unless you're in the Trump cult and then you thought it was really good. I don't know.
Yeah.
Pretty wild. It was wild to be there that night. I wasn't in the chamber. I kinda wish I was in the chamber to see what it was like, but, seeing the senator's reaction was interesting. They were like, "Whoa, I don't know what I just sat through." So it was
Yeah.
cool to get their real-time responses to it.
Yeah, no, but I think you're totally right on really trying to bring a lot of this down to like that, human scale challenge because, it's like I don't know, see and news that how there's, $1 trillion here and $900 billion there and just these giant, things getting thrown around. But it's like, yeah, there is the, Head Start program and that teacher who will not be able to, help those, low
Yeah.
income, kids. And so that's part of the reason, every article for American Inequality, like we had, all of the
Mhm.
charts and maps, but we always include, the story, the kind of personal narrative of
That's what I
someone
love.
who's been
I
struggling.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that about your work because there's that balance of showing that really important visual representation, which shows the scope of it. But then you always bring in the human story because I think you need that balance to really give the full picture of what's going on.
Yeah. So talk to me a bit. And I know some folks had put some like questions in the chat too, but if anyone else like has anything else they
Oh,
want
yeah.
to say, but yeah, Sarah, I'd love to hear like what's, you're working on next. I know there's, you've got like a little, probably a bit of, summer break with school, but yeah, any new things that you are, working on or
Yeah.
focused
So
on where you're
what
like, I need to, yeah.
Yeah, so one thing I'm focused on well, I do have my You'll Miss column where I'm constantly writing about news and history. And one thing I'm working on next week, I'm going to be at the AFT convention and I'm going to be doing a bunch of so first of all, I aside from just I do think it's connected, but one thing that I co-created is this, and it's been a little controversial with the news last week around this, but it's called AI Educator Brain. And our goal with that's to the AFT and Share My Lesson, which is their blog for teachers. We've been doing a series of webinars about how to actually use AI as a tool to help your students, not to help them cheat, but actually help them, first of all, learn the technology because it's not going anywhere. And then also use it in a way to be efficient and, ways to help kids who have IEPs create lessons that are much more detailed for those kids. So that's one thing I've been working on. So I'm going to be presenting about that next week at the AFT convention. And then I'm also working with the AFT to inspire more members, educators, and other members of the AFT to use their digital platforms to advocate, which is scary. And I'm crazy and do it and deal with like lots of hate online, and I'm just numb to it now. But my theory is that if more of us are doing it, the better it will be. The voices will be out there. I think people will start feeling more maybe empowered to make sure they keep voting and make sure they keep speaking out about what's going on with this current administration. So I'm going to be doing a panel with some people who are pretty outspoken online already and get tips from them for the teachers in attendance about how they can get online and start voicing their concerns, whether it's about the book bans, curriculum bans, gun violence, the drills that are not trauma informed, and just their concerns about what's going on even on a local level. So I'm hoping to do that so I'm not the only person online like getting attacked, and maybe we'll just get people to
Right. You're
just
like, just
join us
spread
and
it out.
yeah, spread out the hate a little bit. No, I'm kidding. It's fine. For the most part, I think that more and more people are coming around and realizing that maybe what we're doing to our public school system isn't a good idea. So hopefully more people speaking out will get people turned on to that mindset.
No,
That's
yeah,
really
I think, that's such an important point. All this work is, yeah, just trying to get, our voices heard and like, yeah, leaving messages, at the, congressional offices and tweeting at them like actually does make a difference, even though people think it doesn't. Because, yeah,
yeah.
the staffers who you spoke to, like they are following those things, they are paying attention to them. Yeah. And I think no live event these days would be complete if we didn't also talk about AI. And so I'm glad to hear that you guys are trying to,
Yeah, I mean
you know,
there was some
embrace it instead of reject it. Yeah.
yeah, there were some people who were unhappy because the AFT and the UFT, which is the New York AFT union, partnered with Microsoft and OpenAI last week to set up a center at the UFT office. And
Mm.
people were like, "Oh my God, you're selling it to corporations," which I understand that concern. But the goal is to actually teach teachers how to use it so we are stakeholders and making the decisions and not having them happen top down. But probably some future research of yours will I would love to see research on AI. I don't know if you have that in the works, but
Yeah,
yeah.
we back. I've been kicking it around actually for a while. Like had done a piece, I don't know, maybe in the last 6 months on, like what types of jobs is like generative AI most likely to displace, and different industries there being like, healthcare, like a lot of healthcare admin, and obviously, like software engineers were kind of the two biggest ones, but
Yeah.
that in a totally different category than how a lot of this new AI is gonna, impact like robotics and Amazon, warehouse workers and gig workers and things like that. So I don't know, the robotics part hasn't really gotten there, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
all of AI in education. I don't know. I personally haven't seen much data on it yet, so if anyone has, like, definitely send it along.
Oh,
But
yes. I
how it
would love to see your work on that once you get the data.
how it would impact, like cognition, attention, like the things that we're learning, or isn't a testament to bad homework assignments that we're doing, versus things that students are just cheating on because they just like don't want to spare the time.
R Right. Oh my god, I can't wait till we get the data, so I wanna see what you map out there once you get
Yeah,
that.
yes,
Yeah.
very much so. Um, but yeah, no, this was great to have the chance to
Yeah.
chat as always. And yeah, everyone make sure to go check out Yo Miss, Sarah's Substack, and yeah, looking forward to the next one. So thanks so much,
Yeah.
everyone, for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm such a great I just love your work, so it was great to speak with you.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right, have a good one.
Have a good one. Bye, everyone.